So last video, I talked about this really stressful experience I had recently on a trip. And basically what happened is that I went to visit person A and person B with person C, and all of us had this blowout argument that resulted in person A screaming at me and person B pointing his finger like a javelin at me and saying, "You did this, it's your fault, you caused everything." And yeah, it sucked. It was really awful, and we had to cut the trip short to leave, and then I had this like really traumatic 4 day drive coming back through the Midwest, just stuck in the car. Like my body was hurting, I was exhausted, I was stressed out, and then I'm looking at cornfields for this entire trip coming back. And we're going through small Midwestern towns, and everything is like shut down, and there's no good produce in the grocery stores, and everyone just like looks depressed. Not everyone, but you know what I mean. Like it was rough. And I got back home and I couldn't work. I was just like so run down by trauma and exhausted from everything that had happened that I had like 4 barefoot shoe reviews that I had to work on, and I couldn't even do it. Like I couldn't barely get out of bed. I didn't want to go walk. I didn't want to fix food. Um, and I thought it was because of the trauma of the event. Like when something like this happens to you, it's almost like getting a physical injury. You have to do lots of internal work in order to figure out what went wrong and deal with the images of the thing that you went through, like running around and around in your head. And then on top of that, like the weather here has been shit in upstate New York. It's been cold and rainy, and all of this was just adding up to me not being able to function. However, today there was a little patch of sunshine for a few minutes, and I was out walking, going to the grocery store, and it occurred to me, I was just thinking about the fact that we had done so much preparation, like logistical preparation, trying to make this trip work, because the people we were visiting are pretty far away. We haven't seen them in quite a while. And they're very meticulous about the way that they set their life up. And, the person that I was traveling with and I are quite meticulous in other ways too. So there was a lot of logistical things to figure out. But then it occurred to me that I had done all this logistical planning. All 4 of us had done all this logistical planning, but we hadn't done any emotional planning. And this phrase, emotional planning, just popped into my head. And from that moment on, it was like the trauma was just gone. And I thought, wow, this is so weird. Why did my emotions and my feelings about this completely change? I was basically non-functional for an entire week trying to deal with this, and then suddenly everything is like fixed. And I think what happened is that this phrase that I came up with sort of like it didn't solve the problem, but it like define the problem. And I realized that the thing that really was stressing me out was not the traumatic experience itself, but the feeling that it was going to keep happening over and over again. Because we've visited these 2 people several times, well, a lot of times, and the same thing happens or something like it. And I think that's the thing with trauma that people don't realize, is that it's not as much the actual experience as it is the fear of feeling out of control, like you don't know how to fix the problem. And the first step in that is understanding how to define the problem. And it's interesting because like before I left, I sort of knew that this was the problem. Like the problem was that it's one of those things where all these issues get swept under the rug, and so you're not really talking about them, and then you don't see these people for quite some time, and then you get into a small space, and then like everything just explodes because you're trying to like sweep everything under the rug and not talk about it and not cause any conflicts, but it doesn't work, and I knew that before I went on the trip, but I couldn't really articulate exactly why I didn't want to go. I could give you this list of problems that I could see that I knew that were going to happen, but I couldn't get it down into this little like articulated phrase. And so I think that when you're dealing with trauma, that's actually what you're looking for, especially in the early stage, is just like this small little phrase, this small little idea that you can say in maybe less than 10 words that tells you like what happened, like what the problem is, and then it helps you figure out how not to do that thing in the future, how not to get sucked into that experience. So, for example, emotional planning for me in relation to these two people means that the next time that we plan a visit with them, if we ever stop being angry at each other, is that we have to do some emotional planning. We have to talk about the things that caused this argument instead of just pretending like they don't exist and trying to skate through the visit. Because like trying to visit with people where there's lots of like stress, without trying to deal with some of that stress or understand it before the visit is like being a group of hikers and just going out into the wilderness, not having a map or any preparation. It's like, so of course something happens and you're not going to know what to do, and it's just going to be chaos. So I think it's sort of like the phrase that you're looking for is like a bar, and it's like once you have that phrase, you know, that you were never going to let that trauma happen to you again, because you know what it looks like and you know the bar that you need to pass in order for an experience to be a positive one and not kind of go back into the old loops of trauma. So I just want to give you a couple other examples. I was just like brainstorming some other things. Um, Another traumatic thing that happened to me recently was I got rid of my iPad and replaced it with an e-ink tablet. I don't know if I have it around here. Doesn't matter. But the iPad was like $450. I sold it on eBay, right? And then I go to the post office, I mail it, and it just gets lost. Like it never even left the local sorting facility. And so I had to go into the post office multiple times to talk to a manager, and it was like, they didn't care. They was like, oh, well, it's like lost. And then I'm like, well, I need my money back. And they're like, well, sorry, we can't do that because you bought it through like the shipping through eBay or something. So I go to talk to eBay and eBay won't help me. And yeah, so this is another thing on top of the other traumatic experience that has just been like weighing really heavily on me. And so actually today, the same time that I figured out the first trauma, this trauma was like, I sort of rewinded the series of events that led to me getting scammed out of $450 because this shipment went missing. And it all goes back to me buying cheap shipping. Like, I don't know why I did this. Like, I don't know why I used the post office to mail a freaking iPad, you know? Because so many other places in my life, I have learned not to do things the cheap way. Like with my clothes, like I've been buying higher quality clothes. I've been buying higher quality electronics and all sorts of things that don't break, don't lead to bullshit situations. And yeah, so I realized that I was just buying cheap shipping. And that one was that was a traumatic situation that was pretty easy to figure out. And from now on, I'm going to use UPS, and I'm not going to use the post office anymore. So yeah, that's another example. Another good example is when I used to work as a copywriter. I was working at a 9-to-5 agency type job for about a year, and it was probably the worst time in my entire life. It was so stressful. It was like an open office. I couldn't focus. I hated the clients. And so eventually I just got up one day and this phrase came into my mind where it was just like, I want to work for myself and I'm never going to work for anyone else ever again. And so I quit and then I freelanced, and I started to realize that freelancing actually was kind of like working for other people. Like even though I was self-employed, like I still had clients who were telling me what to do. So eventually I quit, and then I started a YouTube channel, and now I just do whatever I want. And I have kept that phrase in my mind of working for myself. And every time someone tries to get me to do some sort of consulting or working for them, that phrase comes up, and I'm just like, no, I'm sorry. I only work for myself. I made a promise to myself that I'm only going to work for myself for the rest of my life. And it has prevented me from falling back into that spiral of trauma with a type of working that doesn't work for me. But if I didn't have that phrase, it would be really easy for me to get tricked or fooled back into those types of arrangements, because sometimes things seem like it's kind of like freelancing. Like it sort of seems like you're working for yourself, but you're not really, because you have clients who are in control. And so having that phrase really helps protect you against trauma, because it makes everything a clear yes or no decision, not like, oh, maybe this, maybe that, maybe this person will change, maybe this. It's like, you don't want to mess around with like half situations with trauma, because you'll just keep getting sucked back into it. And yeah, I'll leave you with one last example of how to come up with a phrase that resolves trauma. And when I was dealing with iPhone addiction, like I kept trying to quit over and over again. I kept trying to lower my screen time limits, and like, I don't know, I would uninstall apps, and I would like put the phone in a drawer, and all of these different hacks to try to like manage my behavior. But I just, the phone was like literally traumatizing me, because I was wasting so much time, and it was depressing me, and I was comparing myself to other people. So I just kept getting stuck in this loop. And eventually, when I started thinking about getting a light phone, little like e-ink type phone, minimalist phone, this phrase came into my mind where I thought, you can't limit a limitless device. And that made it clear to me that this what would you call it? I don't know. I don't know the word for it, but like when you're trying over and over to do something that's never going to work, crusade, this crusade to manage my phone was never going to work. And so I got rid of my iPhone, and ever since then, I've thought about the devices that I use, and I've realized that when a device is designed to be limitless, like an iPad or an iPhone, and it's designed to have every possible feature and super bright, super colorful, like you can't limit that. Or at least I couldn't. I mean, maybe it'll work for other people, but yeah, that phrase has also protected me from a lot of trauma from electronics. So in general, I don't know. I think it's a really effective strategy. So if you're dealing with some kind of traumatic traumatic event, yeah, I don't know. Think about the phrase that ties everything together, and yeah, that's what will set you free.